long and often brutal history of medieval Europe, one name echoes through the annals of time. Edward of Woodstock, better known as the Black Prince, a warrior, a prince, a legend, and yet a man who never became king. His story is not just about battles and titles, it's about legacy, power, and the burden of destiny. Born in 1330, Edward was the eldest son of King Edward III of England and Philippa of Hainaut. As heir to the throne, he was expected not only to inherit a crown, but to carry the ambitions of a kingdom locked in a bitter struggle with France, a conflict we now know as the 100 Years' War. Many historians view him as a military prodigy, and some even argue that had he lived longer, the course of English history might have changed entirely. From an early age, Edward was raised in the ideals of chivalry, loyalty, piety, courage, and, above all, military excellence. He studied Latin, theology, and heraldry, but his real education came on the battlefield. Edward was created Earl of Chester on March 1333 when he was only 7, Duke of Cornwall on February 1337, the first appearance of this rank in England. By 13, he was Prince of Wales, a clear signal that he was being groomed for greatness. But the turning point came in 1346 when the teenage prince led troops at the Battle of Crécy. At only 16, Edward commanded the vanguard of the English army against a much larger French force. It was here that he earned his spurs, literally and figuratively. According to one famous account, when his forces were under pressure, his father reportedly said, "Let the boy win his spurs." The result? A stunning English victory, with longbowmen playing a decisive role. Edward had proven himself not just as a prince, but as a warrior of international repute. After Crécy, Edward continued to shape his legacy with the Siege of Calais, which lasted 11 months. The city's fall in 1347 gave England a vital foothold in France for over 2 centuries. In 1348, Edward III founded the prestigious Order of the Garter, and Edward of Woodstock was its very first knight. This wasn't just a reward, it was a symbol of his role as the ideal chivalric prince. At this point in history, Edward was not just a military leader, he was becoming a myth in the making. Perhaps the most famous chapter in Edward's military career came in 1356 at the Battle of Poitiers. Outnumbered, cut off from reinforcements and deep in enemy territory, Edward didn't retreat. Instead, he stood and fought. He used the terrain to his advantage, placed archers on high ground, and formed a strong defensive line of dismounted knights. The French cavalry, despite their numbers, couldn't break through. The English longbows once again proved deadly. But what happened next was astonishing. King John Textard of France was captured along with his son. Historian Desmond Sillard notes that Edward's victory at Poitiers elevated him from prince to legend, a knight who bested a king in open combat. It was one of the most humiliating defeats in French history and a massive win for England. Edward reportedly treated the king with honour and dignity, reinforcing his image as a true knight, chivalrous even in victory. In 1362, Edward was granted the Principality of Aquitaine and moved his court to Bordeaux, but ruling proved far more difficult than fighting. The local nobility resisted taxation, politics in the region were unstable, and Edward, trained for battle more than diplomacy, found governance a heavy burden. His decision to support Pedro of Castile in 1367 in a conflict known as the Castilian Civil War led to another victory at Nájera, but at a great cost. His finances were drained and disease spread through his army. Historian Michael Prestwich comments that Edward was ill-suited to civil administration. His strength was in combat, not in diplomacy. By the late 1360 S, the once gold prince was increasingly isolated and financially strained. Even worse, Edward's health collapsed. Chronic fatigue, pain, and weight loss plagued him. Historians debate the cause. Some suspect dysentery, others propose Crohn's disease or tuberculosis. Whatever it was clear the Black Prince was fading. In 1370, Edward led one final campaign of the Siege of Limoges after the city defected to France. According to the chronicler Froissart, 3,000 civilians were killed when Edward's forces stormed the city. That number is debated by modern historians. Some say it was exaggerated, but whether the massacre was as large as reported or not, the damage to Edward's reputation was real. Once praised as the paragon of chivalry, Edward now stood accused of brutality. For many, the prince who once symbolised noble warfare had become a symbol of vengeance. By 1371, Edward returned to England, physically broken, politically sidelined. He died on June 8, 1376, at the age of 45, just 1 year before his father. He spent his final years plagued by illness, likely dysentery or a wasting disease contracted during his campaigns in Spain. His decline was slow and painful, and despite his heroic reputation, he was reduced to a shadow of the warrior who once led England to glory at Poitiers and Crécy. His death came not only as a personal tragedy, but as a political turning point. Edward had long been the heir to the English throne, destined to succeed his father, King Edward III. But fate intervened. With the prince gone, the crown would skip a generation, landing instead on the head of his 10-year-old son, Richard II. The young king's reign would be marked by political turmoil, rebellion, and ultimately his forced abdication. Many historians believe that if Edward had lived to be king, the trajectory of English history might have been very different, perhaps even avoiding the Wars of the Roses. Edward's funeral was a grand affair held at Canterbury Cathedral, one of England's most sacred sites. He was laid to rest near the shrine of St. Thomas Becket, a powerful symbol of martyrdom and divine justice. Above his tomb, an inscription carved in Latin delivers a haunting reminder of mortality. Such as thou art, sometime was I, such as I am, such shalt thou be. A final message from a prince who had seen glory, battle, and heartbreak. And yet the legend lived on. The name Black Prince, though never used in his lifetime, began to circulate centuries later. Some say it referred to the colour of his armour, others point to the dark reputation he earned during the 100 Years' War. Either way, Edward of Woodstock became more than a man, he became a myth. A symbol of lost potential, medieval heroism, and the fragile line between triumph and tragedy. So what do we make of Edward of Woodstock? As a military leader, he was undeniably brilliant. He helped define the new age of warfare where tactics mattered more than titles. As a ruler, he struggled. As a man, he was shaped and scarred by the age he lived in. In the end, Edward was a prince without a crown, but also a symbol of a changing world where ideals of honour clashed with the brutal reality of medieval power. He remains one of England's most iconic historical figures, not because of the throne he never claimed, but because of the shadow he left behind. In stone, in song, and in the stories we still tell today, he was the Black Prince.